He held up his paws higher and let loose a tremendous amount of doggy wind. The force of the expulsion nearly knocked Muchnick to the ground. It was McGrow's secret weapon, and he had been saving it up since breakfast. Von Vleck grew dizzy from the smell and reached up to hold her nose. McGrowl had his 5 seconds. He turned and raced for the door, zigzagging frantically left and right in the event Von Vleck recovered and was able to use her ray gun. She did. Holding her breath now, she raised the magnetic device quickly, squinted and let forth with a massive blast of powerful rays. Just as McGrowl was about to hurl himself through the doggy door and into the safety of the Wiggins kitchen, he was hit squarely behind the ears with a burst of dangerous negative ions. The last thing he saw as he crumpled to the ground was Mrs. Wiggins leaving the front door and heading toward the garage. She was hurrying. She had to pick up Mr. Wiggins to get to the dog show. McGrowl tried to bark, but couldn't even whimper. His legs were weak and he was beginning to lose consciousness. Thomas's mother was trying not to jostle the victory cupcakes she was carrying. She never even looked up as she got into the car. If she had, she would have noticed the large yellow dog crumpling to the ground. Von Vleck and Muchnick hid behind a mulberry bush and watched excitedly as Mrs. Wiggins drove off. They chuckled wickedly. Together they tiptoed over and stared warily down at the defenceless animal. Von Vleck poked at McGrow's flank with the tip of one of her shoes. He didn't stir. McGrowl was out cold. He was theirs. Meanwhile, the passageway grew narrower, and Thomas and Violet were struggling to keep moving. "I don't want to upset you, but I think some snakes just tried to crawl up my leg," Thomas mentioned casually. Violet didn't mind snakes in general, but didn't relish the thought of a bunch of them slithering around in the dark. "Don't you have a flashlight in your emergency kit?" Violet inquired, panic rising in her voice. She could hear the slimy reptiles squishing this way and that as they wriggled effortlessly about in the mud that was everywhere. Thomas fumbled with the toolkit and the flare. He knew the light was in there somewhere. "Hurry, please," Violet said through clenched teeth. "Found it," Thomas said, and finally pulled it out and flicked it on. Violet breathed a sigh of relief. Several large snakes, frightened by the light, slinked away into the recesses of the jagged walls. Thomas examined the cavernous space into which they had fallen. Its walls were dark and craggy and filled with moss and lichen. The children immediately realized they were in some sort of underground cave. The air was dark and dank and moist. The sound of the electromagnet echoed relentlessly from one rocky surface to the next. They had landed in the middle of a series of enormous tunnels that ran under much of Cedar Springs. Thousands of years ago, an underground river ran beneath the entire village. It carved out the endless network of grottos and deeply etched canyons in which they were currently trapped. Both Thomas and Violet quickly determined that aside from a couple of scrapes and bruises, they suffered no broken bones. The damage was minimal. Thomas was already concocting a story to tell his mother to explain the presence of the muddy brown goop that was caked over every inch of their bodies. They moved cautiously down a narrower section of the tunnel, and Thomas stumbled upon a trove of arrowheads next to some ancient cooking pots. Tribes of Native Americans had once used the winding tunnels as clever means of escape when bands of marauding invaders arrived from the north. Eventually, everybody forgot about the tunnels, which became the subject of a popular local folk tune called "Winding Tunnel, Carry Me to Glory." The children of Cedar Springs were required to learn the song in kindergarten, but nobody really thought the tunnels actually existed. When Mal Muchnick was a child, he had come across the tunnels himself and used them as base for operations for his earliest evil doings. As they made their way farther along the pathway that led to the electromagnet, Violet reminded Thomas that they had better turn off the flashlight and conserve batteries. "We could be in here for days, and that beam's looking pretty tired." Thomas agreed. Every night he had used the flashlight to send Violet messages in Morse code through their open bedroom windows. He wished he had remembered to put in a fresh supply of AAA batteries when he left the house. They had to find the electromagnet and disable it. Only then could they notify McGrowl of their whereabouts, and only then could McGrowl come to their rescue. Without their help, there was no way they would ever be able to find their way out of the maze in which they were trapped. The hum from the electromagnet was growing louder. They appeared to be heading in the right direction. Thomas switched off the light and plunging the two children once again into inky blackness. They inched forward. Thomas bumped into what he thought at first was a boulder, but upon closer investigation it turned out to be a door carved into one of the walls of the grotto. The two of them pushed open the heavy door and proceeded cautiously. Thomas turned on the flashlight for a few precious seconds and discovered a gas lamp hanging from the rather low ceiling. Violet located a match. She lit the lamp and soon the area was bathed in a soft yellow glow. They were in a room. A child-sized bed and nightstand were tucked into a corner. Colourful posters lined the walls and covered every surface of the little hideaway. A closer look revealed that the posters depicted a wide assortment of outlaws. Jesse James, Jack the Ripper, Al Capone, to name a few. How strange, Thomas thought. What kind of child would have a room like this? And why? Violet picked up a little diary. It was so old its lock crumbled when she touched it. She opened it and turned a couple of yellowed pages. Today I threw eggs at my cousin. I refused to take a bath again. Thomas hurried over to look. I frightened a little baby. He read further. And when I grow up, I hereby promise to devote myself to being evil and making everyone miserable. This was no ordinary child. Thomas was getting a pretty good idea of whom the wrong room belonged to. It's creepy in here. Let's go, Violet urged. As they turned to leave, he noticed a collection of random objects piled helter-skelter along the wall nearest the door. Thomas immediately spotted the collection of lost-in-space plates his mum's second cousin Tweedy had been missing for several days. Thomas also noticed the cigar box that held the class treasury. He looked inside. Not a penny of the money remained. And then Thomas came upon a little ceramic jar he had made his mother in second grade. The jar was supposed to hold pencils, but Mrs. Wiggins kept it in a drawer in the kitchen and used it to keep the money she gave to delivery boys and the occasional UNICEF trick-or-treater. Of course, Thomas said as much to himself as to Violet. Muchnick had been using this as a storage room for all the stuff he's been stealing from everybody. This must have been his hideout when he was little. You're probably right, Violet concurred. Now, what do you say we try to locate that electromagnet and tell McGrowl where we are? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't mind getting out of this place alive. As the two children hurried out of the room, they couldn't help but notice a framed diploma hanging on the wall. It read, "The school system of Cedar Springs proudly congratulates Milton Smudge upon his completion." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out the little scrap of paper he had discovered in Mabel Rabkin's office. The mysterious letters LTONS suddenly leaped out at him. Of course! Thomas's mind was racing. They were the middle 5 letters of the name on the diploma. Milton Smudge, the unhappiest boy in school. Muchnick broke into Rabkin's office to steal his own folder. Thomas exclaimed. Everything was falling into place. But why would anybody want to steal his own records? Violet asked. Maybe this is why, Thomas said as he picked up a faded yellowing newspaper article from a pile of clippings neatly arranged on a nearby table. The article was all about little Milty Smudge, as he was called, and all the terrible things he had done when he was a little boy. No wonder Muchnick changed his name and attempted to destroy all traces of his nasty childhood. Who would ever have voted for him? And then Thomas recalled an expression his father used often. The child is father to the man. Thomas had to admit that in this case the expression seemed especially apt. He pocketed the diploma along with enough evidence of the man's thievery to put Muchnick and Von Vleck safely behind bars for a good long time. Then he and Violet struggled to close the door that held the secrets of Muchnick's awful childhood.